but we did. It didn't take long. And it's because we sounded so different.
At the age of 74, Mick Mars unexpectedly ignited a storm of controversy when he finally spoke out about Vince Neil, the very bandmate who once helped him build one of the most infamous rock bands in history. His words didn't just stir curiosity. They sent shockwaves through fans and the wider music industry. Suddenly, a relationship long buried under decades of success, chaos, and silence was being re-examined under a harsh new light. What pushed Mick Mars, a man known for keeping his distance from drama, to finally break that silence? The answer lies in years of tension that had quietly built behind the scenes. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Mick didn't hold back. He revealed that he had carried this band on my shoulders for years, a statement that many interpreted as a direct critique of his former bandmates, including Vince. It wasn't just frustration speaking. It was years of feeling overlooked and undervalued finally surfacing. One of the most explosive claims centered around Vince Neil's live performances. Mick suggested that many of them relied heavily on backing tracks to mask vocal limitations, a rumor fans had whispered about for years, now seemingly confirmed by one of the band's founding members. The comment alone was enough to divide the fan base overnight. But Mick didn't stop there. He made it clear that his departure from the band wasn't entirely his choice. He described feeling pushed out, disrespected, and ultimately disconnected from a group he had dedicated his entire life to building. The sense of betrayal ran deep, especially after the band's final tour, when, according to Mick, no one even reached out to him. Tensions escalated further during a radio appearance in early 2024. When asked directly about Vince's current singing ability, Mick chose his words carefully, but the impact was undeniable.
Mick Mars is suing Motley Crüe and confirmed that the band uses backing tracks.
"It is what it is," he said. A simple phrase, yet loaded with meaning. Media outlets and fans alike interpreted it as quiet disappointment, perhaps even resignation to something that could no longer be fixed. In a surprising twist, Mick also admitted that he preferred the era when John Corabi replaced Vince in the early 1990s. He described that period as more musical and more passionate, marking the first time he openly acknowledged a difference in commitment and artistic energy within the band. For longtime fans, this was a revelation that reshaped how they viewed the group's internal dynamics. As expected, reactions came quickly, and they were anything but unified. Some fans sided with Mick, arguing that Vince's decline had negatively affected the band's legacy. Others defended Vince, pointing to his role in shaping their early success. Meanwhile, the remaining members responded in their own ways. Nikki Sixx called the situation regrettable. Tommy Lee chose to stay mostly silent, and Vince himself fired back, claiming Mick's guitar style had made it harder for him to perform. What was once hidden behind the glam, chaos, and spectacle of Mötley Crüe had now become one of the most talked about controversies in rock music. For decades, Mick Mars had remained the quiet force in the background. Now his voice was impossible to ignore. Yet this story isn't just about conflict. It's about legacy. With the silence finally broken, fans are beginning to see a more honest, unfiltered version of the band's history. And at the center of it all stands Vince Neil, a figure whose journey to rock stardom was as turbulent as it was iconic. It all began in 1981 when Vince crossed paths with Tommy Lee and Nikki Sixx at a show. According to those who were there, Vince had something the band desperately needed: charisma, presence, and a voice that could command attention. Mick Mars himself once admitted, Vince was the missing piece of Mötley Crüe.
All of Nikki's live parts are pre-recorded, something that Sixx has adamantly denied in the past.
That decision changed everything. Within just a year, the band exploded onto the American rock scene with their debut album, Too Fast for Love. The chemistry was undeniable. Vince's high-energy vocals, Mick's razor-sharp guitar work, Nicky's driving bass lines, and Tommy's explosive drumming created a sound that stood apart from everything else at the time. By 1983, Motley Crue had officially crossed from rising act to full-blown phenomenon. Their breakthrough album, Shout at the Devil, exploded across the United States, eventually selling over 4 million copies and earning 4 platinum certifications. It wasn't just success, it was domination, and the momentum didn't stop there. Albums like Theater of Pain, 1985, Girls, 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 1987, and especially Dr. Feelgood, 1989, kept climbing the charts, each release reinforcing the band's position at the top of the rock world. By the end of the decade, Mötley Crüe had become one of the best-selling bands of the 1980s, a symbol of excess, rebellion, and pure rock spectacle. At the center of it all stood Vince Neil, the face, the voice, and the attitude that defined the band's image. With his signature blonde hair, magnetic stage presence, and unmistakable vocals, Vince became the embodiment of glam metal itself. Massive tours like the Monsters of Rock in 1988 and the Dr. Feelgood World Tour drew enormous crowds, turning concerts into full-scale cultural events. Fans flooded arenas across the United States and Europe, and Vince's status as a rock icon was cemented. At their peak, the numbers were staggering. 7 platinum or multi-platinum albums, multiple Grammy nominations, and an American Music Award win in 1990 for Dr. Feelgood. From the outside, it looked like nothing could stop them. But behind the success, cracks were already beginning to form. For Vince Neil, fame came with a cost that few truly understood. Every decision, every headline, every late-night excess added weight to a growing pressure that slowly began to reshape him. What started as confidence and energy gradually blurred into chaos. The scandals, the lifestyle, the constant spotlight, they didn't just follow him, they defined him. Even within the band, the shift was impossible to ignore. The turning point came in 1984. A moment that would cast a permanent shadow over Vince's life and the band's future. That year, Vince was involved in a devastating car accident that resulted in the death of Nicholas Dingley, known as Razzle from Hanoi Rocks. The aftermath was severe. Vince was convicted of manslaughter, sentenced to 15 days in jail, and ordered to pay over $2.6 million in damages. It wasn't just a legal consequence, it was a psychological fracture. Publicly, the band stood by him. They defended him, supported him, and pushed forward. But internally, something had changed. According to Mick Mars, the atmosphere within the group was never the same again. Trust had been shaken, and an invisible divide had begun to grow. One that would never fully disappear. From that point on, Vince's image in the media took on a darker tone. He was no longer just the charismatic frontman. He became a symbol of rock and roll's most dangerous extremes. The pressure only intensified, and instead of grounding him, it pushed him further into a lifestyle defined by excess. Parties became constant. Alcohol blurred the edges. Speed, both on and off the road, became part of his identity. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the passion that had once driven his music began to fade. Inside the band, frustration started to build. According to various interviews and accounts, including comments from Nikki Sixx, Vince's discipline became a growing issue. Rehearsals were missed, studio sessions were delayed, excuses were made. There were times he claimed health problems, only to later appear in the media at late-night parties, fueling speculation and resentment among the group. By 1991, the disconnect had become undeniable. Vince was increasingly absent from the band's creative process, choosing instead to focus on car racing and personal ventures outside of music. What had once been a unified force was now struggling to stay aligned. For the rest of the band, it was more than just an inconvenience. It was a breaking point. Projects stalled, tensions escalated, communication broke down. And finally, in February 1992, everything came to a head. Behind closed doors, Motley Crüe held a meeting that would go down as one of the most painful and defining moments in their history. A moment where years of success, conflict, loyalty, and frustration collided and changed the band forever. The breaking point had finally arrived. Nikki Sixx later admitted that things inside Mötley Crüe had spiraled completely out of control. Both Mick Mars and Tommy Lee shared the same conclusion. Vince Neil no longer had the drive to continue. The chemistry that once made them unstoppable had dissolved into frustration, distance, and mistrust. Shortly after the closed-door meeting in February 1992, Vince stepped in front of the press and delivered a blunt, unforgettable line. "I didn't leave the band. They kicked me out." Officially, the band framed it as musical differences, but behind that carefully chosen phrase was a deeper truth, a relationship that had been eroding for years, finally collapsing under the weight of broken trust. What followed was one of the most difficult chapters in Vince Neil's life. Determined to prove himself outside the band, Vince launched a solo career with his 1993 album, Exposed. At first, there was curiosity. Fans wanted to see if he could stand on his own, but that interest quickly faded. The supporting tour struggled to sell tickets, leading to repeated cancellations. Reports from outlets like the LA Times painted a stark image: Vince performing in front of half-empty venues, a once dominant frontman now facing silence where there had once been roar. His next release, Carved in Stone, 1995, failed to turn things around. Critics were harsh, and the media began labeling him as a has-been, a brutal fall for someone who had once defined an entire era of rock. But the professional setbacks were only part of the story. Offstage, Vince's life was unraveling even faster. Legal troubles piled up, arrests related to assault, incidents involving drunk driving, multiple divorces, and ongoing financial disputes that chipped away at his stability. Each headline pushed him further from the image he once held. Then came the most devastating blow of all. In 1995, Vince lost his young daughter, Skylar Neal, to cancer. It was a tragedy that no amount of fame, money, or success could soften. Vince later described the loss as something no achievement could ever make up for. In her memory, he founded the Skylar Neal Memorial Fund, dedicated to helping children battling life-threatening illnesses. But even that act of compassion couldn't fully restore how the public saw him. What made it harder was the absence of those who had once been closest to him. Former bandmates were rarely seen supporting him during charity efforts, reinforcing the growing sense that the bond they once shared had fractured beyond repair. The silence from within the band spoke louder than any statement. Media outlets like Rolling Stone and Billboard began using Vince's story as a cautionary tale, proof that even the biggest legends can fall when the foundation beneath them gives way. Even Mick Mars, known for his quiet nature, acknowledged the emotional distance. "We were never really close off stage," he once admitted. A simple statement, but one that underscored just how isolated Vince had become. By the mid-90s, Vince Neil stood alone, his career fading, his personal life shaken, and his connection to the band all but gone. Every attempt to rebuild seemed to highlight just how far he had fallen, and yet, the story wasn't over. Because just when it seemed like there was no way back, the pressure began to mount, from fans, from the industry, and from the lingering legacy of what Mötley Crüe had once been. The idea of a reunion started to grow. Nostalgia was powerful. Audiences wanted to relive the chaos, the energy, the magic. Record labels saw opportunity. And Vince, facing the reality that his solo path wasn't enough, found himself pulled back toward the very band he had been separated from. By the late 1990s, the reunion became official. On the surface, it looked like a triumphant return. a second chance for a legendary band. But beneath that surface, the cracks hadn't disappeared. They had simply been covered. According to Mick Mars, the dynamic within the group was never truly repaired. The members kept their distance, interacting more like professionals than brothers. "We don't really talk to each other," he admitted, revealing just how fragile the reunion really was. Even in the studio, tensions lingered. Mick later claimed that some of his guitar parts were altered or even removed from final recordings, hinting at ongoing creative conflicts that refused to fade. The reunion kicked off with the 1997 album Generation Swine, which managed to reach number 4 on the Billboard charts, a sign that the band still had commercial power. But behind that success, the question remained: was this truly a comeback, or just a temporary truce in a story that had never really found peace? Despite the hype surrounding their return, the reality behind Motley Crue's reunion was far more complicated than it appeared. The 1997 album Generation Swine may have debuted strong on the charts, but both critics and fans viewed it as an artistic and commercial disappointment, especially when measured against the band's own legendary standards. In interviews, Vince Neil often projected excitement, speaking as though the band had rediscovered its spark. But there was always something guarded in his tone, as if he knew the truth ran deeper than what was being said publicly. Meanwhile, Mick Mars remained consistent in his honesty, describing his relationship with Vince as never really close off stage. And that was the reality. Whatever unity fans saw was mostly surface level. The band still delivered massive tours. Spectacles like Carnival of Sins in 2005 and the 2022 stadium tour brought in staggering numbers, with the latter grossing over $173 million. On paper, it looked like Mötley Crüe had never lost their power. The crowds were there, the money was flowing, the brand was still alive. But behind the scenes, it told a very different story. What appeared to be a revival was, in many ways, a business arrangement. The chemistry that once defined the band had long since faded, replaced by professionalism and obligation. Each member showed up, played their role, and left, rarely interacting beyond what was necessary. Even within the group, instability persisted. Tommy Lee temporarily left the band in 1999 after internal disputes, only to return later as part of the ongoing cycle of tension and reconciliation. Mick Mars, battling chronic health issues, continued to push himself through demanding tours, driven more by commitment than enjoyment. On stage, they still looked like a band. Off stage, they were something else entirely. Individuals moving in parallel rather than together. Industry insiders began to describe Mötley Crüe not as a brotherhood, but as a machine, one that continued to operate because it was profitable. The media framed their reunion as a story of loyalty and redemption, but internally, it was often little more than a temporary alignment of interests. At the center of it all remained Vince Neil. Despite efforts to reshape his image through solo performances, public appearances, and statements, he never fully regained the stature he once held. Controversies followed him relentlessly. Legal issues, unpredictable behavior, and absences from key events only reinforced the growing perception that he was struggling to maintain control. For Mick Mars, this era was not about glory, it was about endurance. At one point, he openly admitted feeling completely isolated in the very band I founded. It was a powerful statement, one that revealed just how disconnected things had become behind the curtain. As the years went on, the cracks became impossible to ignore. From 2010 onward, both the band and its individual members faced increasing scrutiny. Live performances, once their greatest strength, became a source of criticism. Fans and media alike began pointing out inconsistencies, particularly with Vince Neil's vocals. Concert footage spread rapidly online, showing moments where Vince appeared out of sync, out of breath, or struggling to keep up with the songs that had once defined him. In some cases, he even forgot lyrics mid-performance. The use of backing tracks, long rumored, became a focal point of debate. Even Mick Mars subtly acknowledged it in interviews, suggesting he no longer wanted to pretend on stage. It was a quiet but significant admission, one that added fuel to an already growing controversy. For longtime fans, the shift was hard to accept. Comments flooded social media, many expressing disappointment. They were once on top, some wrote. Now they're just a shadow of what they used to be. It wasn't just criticism, it was a sense of loss, as if something once powerful had slowly faded in plain sight. Behind the scenes, reports painted an even colder picture. Band members reportedly had little to no contact outside of scheduled appearances. They showed up when contracts required it, performed, and then returned to their separate lives. The image of unity still existed, but only in carefully crafted visuals, album covers, and tour posters. In reality, the distance between them had never been greater, and after years of holding things together through momentum, money, and memory, everything was approaching a breaking point. As the years went on, even attempts to reshape public perception began to fall apart. Reality TV appearances featuring Vince Neil, including shows like Celebrity Wife Swap, were meant to reconnect him with audiences in a more personal way. Instead, they had the opposite effect. Rather than rebuilding his image, they exposed the instability in his private life, reinforcing the narrative that things were far from under control. At the same time, Mick Mars was fighting a battle of his own, one far less visible but far more painful. For decades, he had lived with ankylosing spondylitis, a degenerative condition that slowly fused his spine and caused constant physical suffering. It was a struggle he had endured since his teenage years, long before fame, long before the world ever knew his name. And yet he stayed. Through the chaos, the conflicts, the tours, and the years of growing distance within Mötley Crüe, Mick remained committed. But by 2022, the weight of everything, his health, the tension, the sense of isolation, had finally reached its limit. In October of that year, Mick Mars officially announced his retirement from touring. It marked the end of an era. Just months later, John Five was brought in to replace him, a move that symbolized the most significant shift in the band's lineup since its early days. For many fans, it wasn't just a lineup change. It was the closing of a chapter that could never truly be recreated. But the story didn't end there. In April 2023, everything escalated. Mick Mars filed a lawsuit against the remaining members of Mötley Crüe, and the details sent shockwaves through the rock world. In his complaint, Mick accused the band of deliberately cutting him out of creative decisions, manipulating financial structures, and relying on playback during live performances to cover weaknesses. Perhaps most controversially, he publicly confirmed what had long been debated, that many of Vince Neil's live vocals depended heavily on backing tracks. The reaction was immediate. Fans split into opposing camps. Some stood firmly with Mick, viewing him as a symbol of loyalty and authenticity, someone who had finally spoken the truth after years of silence. Others defended Vince, arguing that the situation was being exaggerated and that the realities of aging performers were being unfairly scrutinized. Within the band, responses varied. Nikki Sixx described the lawsuit as unfortunate, a carefully measured reaction that revealed little. Tommy Lee largely avoided public commentary. Vince, however, pushed back, claiming Mick's departure was due to declining health and suggesting he had struggled to stay in sync on stage. Mick's response? Simple, cold, final. It is what it is. There was no anger left in his words, just acceptance. And in that acceptance, it became clear that any hope of reconciliation had completely vanished. The fallout extended far beyond the band itself. Media outlets across the world began describing the situation as one of the most bitter and chaotic breakups in American rock history. The image of Mötley Crüe, once built on rebellion, unity, and larger-than-life energy, was now being re-examined through a far more complicated lens. On a personal level, Mick Mars found a new kind of validation. His solo album, The Other Side of Mars, was met with strong support, proving that his artistry could stand on its own. For the first time in years, he wasn't just seen as part of a band. He was recognized as an individual voice. Vince Neil's path, however, remained uncertain. While he never publicly admitted defeat, his increasing silence and distance from media suggested something deeper, an isolation that had been building for years. The spotlight that once elevated him now seemed to expose every flaw. And so, after more than 4 decades, what remains is both extraordinary and complicated. A legacy filled with groundbreaking music, unforgettable performances, and cultural impact, but also one marked by unresolved conflict, distance, and hard truths. The story of Mick Mars and Vince Neil is more than just the rise and fracture of a legendary band. It's a reflection of what fame can demand and what it can take away. Loyalty, identity, friendship, all tested under the weight of success. In the end, the music lives on. But so do the lessons. And maybe that's the real story behind the spotlight. What do you think about everything that happened between Mick Mars and Vince Neil? Was it inevitable, or could things have turned out differently? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of rock's most complicated stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.